Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the Wild Meat Symposium. It's great to have everyone here. So basically this symposium is about evidence-informed interventions from the forest to the fork. So this is an opportunity for us to really showcase the work that's being conducted by two big programs that have been focused on wild meat over the last few years. So one of those is the Sustainable Wildlife Management Programme, so the SWM Programme, which is funded by the European Union, and the other one is the UKRI GCRF Trade Hub. So both of these programs have really brought together many different practitioners and researchers from across Central Africa to work together to try and build the evidence base to inform more effective interventions. And those interventions include things all the way from sustainable hunting to demand reduction in the cities. So we've got a range of speakers here today to present all of those different activities that we've been doing over the last few years. So we've got 10 presentations in total, and this symposium is going to last 3 hours, but we do have a half-an-hour break in the middle. So the first half will run from 3:15 to 4:45, and that's mainly going to be focusing on the Sustainable Wildlife Management Programme. So that's going to be setting the scene, what is the current context in relation to wild meat, and also presenting a lot of the sustainable hunting approaches. And then in the second half, which is going to start in 5:15, and that will move more towards the GCRF work, and focusing on the urban side, so consumption and trade in urban areas, as well as talking about zoonotic diseases. So we've got a great lineup of speakers. And I'd just like to say a few shout-outs as well to our donors. So obviously the EU for the SWM programme and UKRI GCRF for the Trade Hub. But another key donor for both CIFOR and WCS, who are co-organising this symposium, is US Fish and Wildlife, and we're thankful to have people from US Fish and Wildlife here. And also the Osborne Memorial Lecture Fund, who has been instrumental in ensuring WCS's participation at this event, both in terms of sponsoring ICCB and enabling the participation of, we've got over 40 African participants from our different programs here, so it's great that we've had that support to be able to do that. Finally, there's a couple of other things just to mention. There's a fantastic exhibition at the WCS booth by Brent Sturton. So he is a National Geographic photographer, so some of the images you'll see here and in the presentations are by Brent. And during the break, you're welcome to come and have a look at some of the material that we have at the front here, including a copy of the National Geographic article. So that article features quite a lot of the work that is being presented today for the different programs. And so I think without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker. So Robert Nasi is the Director General of CIFOR and the Chief Operating Officer of CIFOR-ICRAF. And Robert has been working on wild meat issues for many years and is definitely a recognised expert in the field. So it's great to have him here to start us all off during this symposium. So thank you. And I'll hand over the floor to Robert.
Thanks, and you can leave in fact, fundamentally the intro slide, because I've decided that I will spare you my 257 slides PowerPoint. That if I had uploaded it anyway, will not be there anyway. So I'm going to try to bring you on a sort of a walk on the wild side, and talking about this whole issue of, I've been given the easy task of trying to tell you how we can achieve sustainable, equitable, and safe use of wildlife for food in Central Africa and beyond. You will see them. So what are we talking about here? It's sort of, if you ask the people in the street in Europe, I mean, a sort of what is wild meat, and so they don't know. If you ask the people in the Congo basin, qu'est-ce que c'est la viande de brousse, they know, and if you are invited sometimes by a minister, you are served some viande de brousse, and you can see also that in the restaurant they use posters that were developed for endangered species as menu. So this is a big of an issue, and it's something that brings us to the whole question of scaling up and moving from what you can call as the tyranny of the case study to, okay, how do you implement something at scale? And scale is the problem here, and that's, as Mattia will tell us later in his talk, I mean, a sort of, we are talking about an order of magnitude of about 2.5 million tons of meat that people are eating every year. And then you say, okay, how can I ask these people that are already under any international standard in terms of protein intake, in terms of food safety, in terms of dietary diversity, to stop eating meat? What can I propose to them as an alternative? And then you are stuck by the scale issue. If you want to produce 2.5 million tons of meat in the Congo Basin, then you will need to increase considerably a livestock sector that doesn't exist, or breed billions of chicken, or bring million tons of frozen chicken from Brazil. But there is a problem. As of today, we don't have an alternative. And it's a wicked problem, because fundamentally what you have here is a sort of not a triple win problem, you have a triple lose. So that's the stock. I mean, the biodiversity is lost. No one is getting richer anyway. And you have a looming food security, food safety crisis. In addition to that, there is also a very serious risk of increasing emerging viral disease. And we are all coming out of the COVID pandemic, and fundamentally the next one is waiting to happen, linked to these sort of things. And it's mostly because the way we have unbalanced our ecosystem, and we can do something about that. And Cedric will tell us later about this whole issue of the zoonotic risk along the value chain of bushmeat, taking Cameroon as an example. Now, this issue is not a new one, and if you read the literature, I mean, a sort of, which is very much about, as I said, a lot of case study, you have people coming up with grand ideas of, okay, we should stop hunting, we should ban the sale of wild meat, we should close all the wet markets. Well, as I said, I mean, unless you provide an alternative to the people, this is not going to happen. So that's the question. I mean, a sort of, how can we do that, and how can we develop something that is, and sorry to be, I took a picture about conservation optimism with Dan Milner-Golan, and to be a bit pessimistic, but fundamentally what we are trying to do here is buying some time so that you pass a generation and then people are conscious about the problem, and then you find a way, you find an alternative, and then ultimately, I mean, a sort of, you still have something in the forest or in the savannah that can help nature to rebound. And so the question that we have is, okay, how can we look at a real life, not small case study, but real life, real size, landscape scale management system that could eventually work, looking at the various differences. And of course, one part of the issue is sustainable hunting. Can we do sustainable hunting, under which condition? And that Davy will tell us about rural community and sustainable hunting, and what the lessons from the SWM program. And indeed, we need to manage. And François will tell us, I mean, so how can, using a low-tech game, you can inform and convince and co-construct sustainable management practice with local people. Germain will tell us a real case study in the Kabo concession about sustainable hunting practice. And then immediately you hit the urban-rural divide. I mean, a sort of, okay, you need to manage at the rural sector because people have no alternative, but then you have a big demand in urban center. And urban people consume 10 times less bushmeat than rural people, but still a big number. And very often, urban people have access to alternative source of protein. So there is no safety, food safety or food security need for them to eat bushmeat. So what we need to do is change the behavior of these urban people, and Juliet will tell us about what you can do in terms of policy intervention, but policy alone are unlikely to work unless you trigger significant behavioral changes. And we know that change is difficult. I mean, everybody is willing to change as long as they don't have to change, but the neighbor can change it. I mean, look at the, so if everybody recognizes that we need a jail, but not in my neighborhood, please, on the other one. So that's a different issue. And Eric and Liliana will describe some interesting approaches in terms of how can you trigger, how can you elicit behavioral change in urban settings. And finally, there's the whole issue of social media. I mean, it's sort of quite worryingly, now you can buy bushmeat on Facebook. Next in Amazon, maybe. Not Amazon, the forest, of course. So, Divin will tell us, I mean, a sort of this worrying story about Facebook and bushmeat and the unintended consequences of this increasing connection and connected world and what it's trouble. So, be ready for the work on the work side, and now I will leave people that have real contents to take. Thank you.
Great. Are there any questions for Robert? Or we can continue with the next speaker. So the next speaker is Mattia Bessone, who is a postdoc at CIFOR, working on the SWM Programme. And his presentation is about the consumption of wild meat in Central Africa, a regional analysis of the temporal and spatial trends.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. So as Julia just said, I will talking to you about the analysis we did on the consumption of wild meat in Central Africa in the past years. Robert already said most of it, but we all know. Yes, sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So we are living in a changing world, right? And Central Africa is no different. There is a large population growth. So in Central Africa, for example, the population went from 70 million to 140 million in 20 years. And this is basically only the time frame where we will be focusing on this talk. And similarly also urbanization. So there's the largest population of people now living in urban settlements, which leads to deforestation. This paper, for example, showed that 17 million hectares of rainforests have been cleared from 2000 to 2014. And of course, yes, okay. It's a big audience, yeah. Thank you very much. Can you hear me now very well? Okay, good. And so we see that the pressure on wildlife is increasing because we see decreasing wildlife populations, right? And this is bad per se for many reasons, but it's also very bad because of the importance of eating wild meat in Central African populations. So this decreasing wildlife population can actually turn up to be an issue of food security for millions of people in the region. And as Robert very well said, there's no alternatives at the moment for a lot of people in the region. So with the studies, we wanted to scale up and take a regional approach. So because this is not a new problem, it has been known for several years, and there has been a lot of studies out there that looked at specific drivers and situation triggering wild meat consumption in different areas of Central Africa. And we thought that these studies together can really be helpful to provide a better understanding of what is going on at a larger scale, so throughout the region, and they can really be a tool for real-world applications. So with the wild meat project, we try to collect and standardize as many consumption data set collected between the year 2000 and 2022. And to increase our geographical coverage, we did not only concentrated on what we were hoping to have, so studies looking at the quantity of wild meat consumed over a certain period of time, but also studies that also only looked at the frequency of consumption, for example, so how often people consume wild meat over a certain period of time, And also simple yes-no studies. So did you consume wild meat or not over the past few days? And this allowed us to significantly increase our database. So we managed to include 29 studies that represents 252 sites and more than 12,000 households in Central Africa, which of course sounds like a very large data set, but if we compare with the population in Central Africa, we know that it is a drop in the ocean. But still, it's by far the largest database ever assembled. And with this database, we wanted to pursue a certain objectives, and the main one was to estimate regional consumption rate in Central Africa. And in doing so, we also wanted to assess the drivers and the factors enabling, promoting wild meat consumption in the region, and ideally also investigate trends in wild meat consumption, both geographically and temporally. So to do so and to bring together these different data types, we decided to came up with a model that basically allowed the interaction between these different data types. And the concept was relatively simple. So we just thought that the product of the consumption probability, which is the quantity given by these yes-no studies, times the frequency of consumption, so how often people consume wild meat, times the quantity consumed in a day, will give us exactly what we were hoping for. So the average wild meat consumption rates that we expressed in grams per AME per day, where AME is just a standardized way to refer to a person. It basically accounts for the fact that children consume less than adults in a household. And then in doing so, we were also able to assess potential drivers of consumption probability, frequency of consumption, and consumed quantities, which was nice because we could tear apart these different quantities and see what was affected by what. And these are some of the drivers that we tried to evaluate, not all of them, but the most important list. So forest condition as a proxy of wildlife availability. So the assumption was that if wildlife is available, then people is more likely to consume it. Remoteness was another one. Some areas that are more remote will consume wild meat more often because there's basically less alternatives. And on the other hand, Human Development Index is an indicator of development, of course, and in less developed areas, we expect food systems to be less present, and therefore people will rely more on wild meat for their livelihood. And also human population density was another one, pretty interesting, that we discuss later. And what do we found? So forest condition, as expected, was positively correlated with wild meat consumption. Here you can see in blue the effect on the probability of consumption, and in pink on the frequency of consumption. And you can see in this case both of them are positive, so more than zero. So the more the better the forest condition, the higher the consumption rate. And remoteness has had a similar trend. So particularly for frequency of consumption, not so much for probability of consumption, but this again was confirmed our expectations. And Human Development Index had the expected effect on the probability of consumption, so a higher proportion of people would consume wild meat in less developed areas, essentially. Human population density is a bit more complicated. I try to walk you through this plot. We wanted to have an interaction, so to see how human population density affects wild meat consumption in different settlement types. And in villages, we saw that more populated areas tended to consume wild meat less frequently, which is what we expected, so a negative effect. Even though it is not significant, we saw the opposite when it came to consumption probability, and this was kind of surprising to us, and I try to explain how we interpreted this in the next slide when it comes to towns. And in towns, you can see this positive effect of human population density on consumption probability is very positive. So it's very significant. And the explanation we gave to that is urbanization. So these towns really are functioning lately as a magnet for rural population that basically move from rural settlements to towns to find a living. And this rural population that moves to towns, they have a look for wild meat to eat. And these towns also function as a hub for the wild meat trade. So these are the first step towards larger city. So we expect in these towns to have a large availability of wild meat and low prices, which means that a large proportion of people eat wild meat instead of other alternatives. And exactly the opposite happens in cities, and this makes sense. So the larger is the city, the lower is the probability of consumption, because wild meat is expensive. And in cities, the larger is the city, the more a luxury products become, as Juliet and others will tell us later. So I try to move. And when we predicted, we used this effect to predict consumption rates across the region. This is what we found. So this is the average consumption rate across the whole region. And you can see here the blue areas, these are mostly urban areas, so where there's a high population density. Whereas all the yellowish and pink and greenish areas, these are rural areas. And this is where wild meat consumption rates are higher, essentially. This is what we expected and what we saw. But when we multiplied the consumption rate times the population, in the area we saw a very different picture. So first of all, we saw an increase from the period between 2000 and 2010, 64% increase. And when we saw that the hotspots of consumed biomass, so where is the more wild meat consumed, it's not necessarily the largest capital cities, but it looks like there's a big problem in these provincial and towns and cities very far from the capital, that have still good access to wild meat, and where we think wild meat might be less expensive than alternatives. So food systems are not so developed, and people still will go for wild meat instead of other alternatives. This is another interesting one. So the supplied protein. So where wild meat is very important in the diet of people. So you can see that in average, wild meat supplies about 18% of the daily protein intake, but somewhere this is very close to 100%. So that it will probably never be 100%. There's a lot of uncertainty here, but it means that in certain regions, wild meat is very essential component of the diet of the local populations, and therefore not having wild meat can be a real problem for food security in those regions. And so just a few slides, it's on the way forward. These are just a few recommendations. Yeah, very quickly, because everybody will talk about that. You'll hear more. But in cities, we all agree, so cities have alternatives, and we need a dramatic reduction of wild meat consumption in cities. In towns and provincial cities, the development of food system will ideally allow to reduce wild meat consumption, and this will trigger, we also reduce commercial hunting in rural areas. That is another big problem for wildlife depletion in rural areas. And I close saying that the way forward is clear wildlife legislation. This is happening in many countries, not everywhere, unfortunately. And with effective enforcement, we hope we will be able to provide an environment that enabling the sustainable management of wildlife for the people that needs it. Thank you very much.
Okay, do you have any questions for Mattia?
Come on.
There's a question over there.
Thank you very much for the talk. I just wondered, so in the factors that you consider to contributing to the probability and the actual consumption, what about cultural preference? Like, is there, well, I don't know, either through the experience of some of the data collectors, is there a sense of, does cultural preference vary by, city, town, rural area for wild meat?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that's very true. Cultural preferences are, I mean, it's quite general in Central Africa that people will will go for wild meat if they have the chance, because of it's the cultural heritage. Even if people live in cities since a long time, they still like to have this connection with their place where they were born and so on. There's also a reason of the perception of wild meat in most populations, so that it's healthier than alternatives, even of livestock, for example. Unfortunately, in this analysis, because we gathered data from the very different studies from many different years, we did not have this information for a lot of the studies. So we basically used this knowledge to interpret our results, but could not include it.
Okay, thank you.
Is wild meat consumption considered legal or illegal? And if it is legal, is there any veterinary intervention or public health intervention in looking at the meat? So, yeah, the problem is that it's not legal, but also legal. So the big problem, when I was saying about the clear legal framework about wild meat consumption and trade, it means that in most Central African countries, I would say all of them, there's this gray zone where people is allowed to hunt and to sell and also to consume. But on the other hand, this is not completely legal, so if you are caught, they might still seize your meat, the meat you're trying to sell or transport. So it's very complicated, and this is part of the problem to us. So the fact that it's not clear what is legal and what is not. That is what.
I think probably time for one more question.
I have a related question to that, but thank you. This was a great opening for this session. I'm wondering about, the idea that you get clear legislation. So let's say the legislation is crystal clear. What are your thoughts on effective enforcement of that legislation? What are some of the easy things that can get done, and what are going to be some of the challenges?
Yeah, so this is another problem. The enforcement of legislation is definitely going to be easier in, for example, in cities where there is a system in place. The enforcement of legislation in most rural areas, particularly in the interior of countries like the DRC, for example, is going to be very, very tricky. But the fact is, at the moment, from my experience, anyone does what he wants, right? It really comes to what is the situation at the moment, at the very moment when you find wild meat on a road or on a stall. And of course, the improvement of the enforcement of these laws will be a crucial part of any further action towards the reduction of wild meat consumption.
Great. Thank you so much, Mattia. That was fantastic. Okay, so next up we've got Davy Fonteyn, and he's talking about engaging rural communities in sustainable hunting, so progress and lessons learned in Central Africa by the Sustainable Wildlife Management Programme. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me well? Yeah, it sounds okay. So hello everyone, good afternoon. So as we already heard or we know, tropical forests of Central Africa are the place home to a diverse wildlife, and many species, including this red duiker here, are hunted for their meat, providing income and food and income for many rural communities. However, as Mattia has already mentioned, the demographic growth is increasing the demand everywhere, but especially in urban areas, and it's coupled with very few income generating alternatives, so it's putting more and more pressure on this fragile ecosystem. And so today I would like to present the entire community engagement process that we have been trying to implement with the EU-funded SWM program. going from the initial socio-ecological diagnosis to the emergence of autonomous hunting association with which are recognized legally. So I'm just gonna briefly give some explanation about the SWM program. So since 2018, the SWM teams are working in 15 different countries to improve wildlife conservation and food security. And their work is based on 4 major pillars. So improve, we just talked about that during the question, but improve all the rule and regulation around hunting. Also increase the supply of sustainably produced meat products and also fish. Strengthen and improve the capacity of those who rely most on wildlife, so indigenous and rural communities, and also trying to reduce demand for wild meat in urban hubs. Okay, so SWM, for the moment, because it has been one phase of the program, there will be another phase, has been working in Central Africa in 3 specific sites, and Cameroon will join us in the second phase. So we are working in East Gabon with 10 groups of villages. We are close to a provincial town, Lastourville there, and also not so far from a national park. In northern Congo, you can see that the communities with whom we are working are close to the Nobalendoki National Park, and also inside a forest permit, and or close to it. And in DRC, we are working, the consortium, and WCS specifically is working in the Okapi wildlife landscape. So that's all the sites we are working in Central Africa. But during the past few years, I was more involved in the Gabon work. And so this presentation is supposed to be representative of all the work, but we have other people from this site who will be presented work after, so don't hesitate to also ask questions about it. So this figure, I know it's a bit tough, but it's the schematic representation of the whole community engagement process towards sustainable hunting practices and towards sustainable wildlife management. And I will go through each step to explain a bit more what we have done during the program. So it all starts with a clear description of the planned activities and the validation by the entire community. I don't have the time here to describe all the social safeguards we have implemented, but it includes quite quickly the empowering of right holders and the marginalized group. We implemented also all the FPYC principle in all the engagement process, setting up also complaint mechanism, and including the gender approach in all the activities we can. So the second step is a key step in the diagnosis prior to any community-based wildlife management, is a thorough understanding, a refined understanding of the entire hunting system in order to better understand all the stakeholders and the hunting methods used, the species and quantity hunted, and also the spatial coverage of hunting activities. So it's really, this monitoring is really crucial for communities, for empowering communities to keep track of their game population, and it's also essential for evidence-based management decision in the future. And so here on the right side of the page here, you can see there is the standardized sheet we are using in Gabon for collecting data on hunting activities. So there is information about hunting trips, also on catches composition, with different data about the weight, the age, the catching method, and sex, and so on. And as you can see, I don't know if it's clear, but according to the social safeguard, when I went quite quickly, hunters are not personally identified. They have their own numbers, so we can never really relate and give to the authority potentially information. And also hunters on a voluntary basis can also be equipped with a GPS device to allow project team, but also communities, to better inform hunting yields, including spatial information, but also help us to better map hunting territories, and also, for example, to localize all the catches we have in the hunting system we are working. The third step is is supposed to help us to complete and potentially refine the game population assessment. So we are using in all the 3 sites camera trap campaigns in the hunting areas once they were identified, but also in control sites, mostly protected areas. I don't have the time here to describe you all the protocols and the data collection method we have used, so don't hesitate to ask questions, but I need to move on the next. And so once the diagnosis has been well established and all the data collection protocols are well integrated by hunters and all the community, we can move on the next stage, formalizing the hunter into a hunting association. So it's a key stage because we are moving from an individual effort to a collective management of a resource with formally recognized rights and duties. So the association adopts statutes and internal rules, but also a hunting management plan. And this document sets out all the objectives of the association on the mid and long term, as well as a 5-year program, the annual hunting plans, and the association budget. So we are helping all the hunting association to write this document. And the final step of all the process is to obtain recognition of land rights to ensure exclusive use of the hunting area by the community who is managing it. So this can be quite tricky in some part. In Gabon, for example, we were only able to launch this procedure for 2 villages because national planning is not always it's not always possible. For example, some villages are included in forest permit and they cannot have like their own rights on the forest. So we need to work on that part of land rights during the next phase. So we have now the virtuous circle of adaptive management and can be set in motion with communities collecting monitoring data that can inform like evidence-based management indicators and guide therefore this good management decision making. To make so community a self-governing entity, but this empowerment of hunting association, but also forest authorities who are controlling all these activities requires sometimes a little help. And so we, specifically for the Gabon site, we have developed a tool we call Logic. So Logic, I'm going to just present you quickly and I'm going to end on that. So Logic means in French, liste d'outils de gestion intégrée à la chasse. So it's basically a hunting management toolbox. And it has been used really at the beginning to ease data entry and correction, but now it's mostly used to support standardized reporting to the communities, to the hunting association, to the forest authorities, and also to assist in evidence-based management decision. So how does it work? So we have different types of raw data that can be used to help management decision. So we have hunting harvesting data, also GPS hunting tracking data, and the camera trap data. And all this data at some point handled by the Logic tool. So off-take data, as you remind maybe, it's a paper. So it's first digitized and then put online. And we are using an optical reading tool using Google Vision to read that all this data, because there's a lot. And then once these data are compiled, they undergo different consistency tests and are potentially corrected by the Logic user. And so here you have, so Logic is it's a shiny app, so that's how it looks like. And here you have the interface of how you're managing the file scan and how you can correct the inconsistencies that have been highlighted. And then you have the clean data at the end. And this part is still under development, but it's the part about the analysis of GPS data and all the resulting spatial indicators. And at the end, all these data are aggregated into a single database that can be exported at any time, and can be used to generate reports, which we called info service, and it's really useful directly for the hunting association, for example, for the revision of the hunting plan each year, or during the quarterly meetings that they have been doing since the past years, or the past few years, for the most engaged communities. And so, just like my final a slide. It's about you to see how looks an info service and how is it, how the information is given to the hunting association for the moment. So it's a standard structure which presents like the offtake data, also quotas. I'm not sure we say that in English, but yeah, I think so. And yeah, the average catch number per hunter and so on. And there is also a little box to say how do you need to interpret this information and what are the recommendations of the hunting association committee. So I'm done, sorry. I'm done, so any question?
Thanks. You touched on the difficulty of ensuring land, some tenure over the resources, legal recognition of the community's rights, and therefore the ability to ensure that it is managed sustainably. And I wondered if you touched on, in your work at all, not just the legal right, but the practical ability of people in that community to essentially exclude other communities, other people who may not be from the traditional structure in the area to come into their area, and especially if that area becomes well managed and therefore has healthier populations, there may be even more people who see, oh, they've got plenty dikers over there, let's go over there and see what we can get.
Yeah, thank you for this question. So first we try to really make how do you say that? Participatory mapping with all the villages we're working with. So there is really an acceptance and a lot of meetings of validation about the hunting territory of a group of villages. So it's supposed to be everybody has attend to every meeting, and there is clear delineation between neighbor communities. And we are quite really involved with the local forest authorities about there is issue definitely with intruders, external intruders, not neighboring communities, but for example workers from logging companies and so on. And so that's really an issue that everyone is aware of. We cannot delimit physically the hunting territory with a barrier, so it will be really a tough work for the forest authority, but we are quite trying to reduce already the neighboring conflict that can be risen through participatory mapping. So, but yeah, for internal intruders, external intruders, it's a complicated topic. I don't have like a perfect solution.
Any more questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. In the beginning, you mentioned reducing demand from the rural hubs. What is the tools or mechanism you are trying to do that with, and is it effective?
Okay, so as Robert just said, we will have quite a few presentations after about behavioral change campaign and so on. So I will let people have to answer that, but yeah. So you will, I'm pretty sure you will have all the information you need after.
Hi there. I know you had to speed through the slides there, so perhaps it was in the slides. But when you are selecting these communities and establishing these hunting associations, what's in it for the communities to maintain these hunting associations? What are they getting out of it? This is it. You know, it is a lot of. It looks like a lot of time and a lot of effort. Yeah. So what are they getting out of it?
So most of the time, they wanted to be engaged in the process because they wanted really to, as the question was mentioned, to protect their territory and to be recognized as their own territory through an hunting association. So it was not financial first motivation, but now since monitoring and all the hunting association are quite well on the wheel, I don't know how to say that in English, but they are working well. We are talking about like, if it can be comparable to like an organic label, about like a sustainable label of meat products. And so now some hunters are selling their meat a bit with a higher price, so it begins to be they begin to be a final financial support of being involved in this older program. But there is a lot of capacity empowerment, and actually rural communities are really keen about that. They really want that we help them about budget management and all this kind of stuff that we are helping them for the hunting association work. So it's not always financial that they want at first. So we try to not have like financial incentive, because it won't be like sustainable.
Great, thank you. So thanks so much, Davy, that was great. Okay, so next up we've got François Sandrin. He's our Sustainable Hunting Advisor at WCS, also working on the SWM programme. And he's going to be talking about planning for sustainable wildlife management is a game, or is it?
Hello everyone, so I'm working for the WCS within the SWM program, and my role is to support the different implementation sites on the work related to hunting governance and hunting monitoring tools. Before I start this presentation, I'd like to ask you a few questions you can answer in your head. Did you or your colleagues ever struggle to find an effective approach to engage with local communities and indigenous people? Did you ever think that your community meetings were too theoretical and you lost your audience attention? Did you ever find it hard to explain complex concepts such as sustainability with words to local communities? So if you answered yes to at least one of these questions, then you may find interesting what I'm going to talk about. So yeah, my presentation is about adult learning for local communities and indigenous people through serious games as a way to discuss local hunting systems and work together to achieve sustainability. So first, here are some of the reasons why you should use serious games. First, games allows for people to explore what-if scenarios in a short period of time that will take years in the real world. Games also allow people to make decisions, sometimes good decisions, sometimes bad, but without jeopardizing their well-being or causing damage to the environment. And more importantly, also games allow us to discuss and learn how to solve real problems and make better decisions in the real world, and having fun doing so. And finally, games also help us to make explicit what underlies current management practices that are often implicit. They also provide a solid basis for deciding which management practices would be most likely to generate the desired outcomes. So, yeah, many games on natural resources management exist, and many of them has been developed by and for academics, and they are often based on computer software. And these are good teaching tools, but only when players are already familiar with computers and problem-solving games. But in most rural communities, few people are actually familiar with either. However, in many cultures, they have a long history and experience of simple or complex multiplayer games, such as chess, for example. And these are games with physical objects that the player manipulates. So within the SWM program, various sites decided to implement adult learning activities through games. And different games have been created depending on the implementation site with slightly different approaches and desired outcomes. For example, the Guyana site created a set of games and activity for children to raise awareness, environmental awareness. The Gabon side developed a game on hunting where the hunters invent their management rules. And the Congo, DRC and Madagascar sites implemented a series of simple games where hunters experiment different management options. And so this presentation will focus on these simple games for Congo, DRC and Madagascar. So these games are played with group of 5 to 8 players who take on the roles of hunters, but more people can of course attend the game session and participate to the discussions. The aim of these games is to explore different management options or tools that gradually lead to a sustainable hunting system. And to achieve this, we have then a series of games, each building on the conclusion of the previous one and adding a new level of complexity. So we preferred to evolve step by step rather than proposing a complex game directly from the beginning. So basically the principle is to play 2 scenarios for each game. The first with no management rules or tools, and the second scenario with an additional management rule. And then we compare and discuss the results of the 2 scenarios, and we imagine how these rules or this tool could be adapted to the local context. So our games are adapted to the specific context of each site, but globally the first game is about the access to information, so that hunters became aware and realized the need of having information on wildlife population and on hunting pressure. So we therefore reflect together on how to obtain this information using which method and which tool. The second game is about spatial rotation and zoning, and in this game the players recognize the benefit of applying a concerted spatial rotation or zoning system. And this is a common practice, but it is usually not concerted at the village level. So after the games, we discuss how to organize this concerted spatial rotation for the whole territory. And game 3 focuses on species selection. At the end of the game, the players normally understand why not all species can be hunted at the same intensity, and we therefore reflect together on which species can be hunted and which species should be more protected. As you can see, the materials we use are very simple and easy to procure, as we use beans, fabric bags, bowls or plates. We need a table, basically things that you can find pretty much everywhere and at a low cost. And I also want to add that we also developed Kabo Collect digital forms to help with data entry, quick calculation, and summarize the results to help during the discussions. But you can still play the games without it. So here are a few examples of the initial outputs these games can lead to. For the first game, for example, remember that the goal is that the hunter realize that they could better manage wildlife if they know how many animals they hunt at the village level. So the hunter from the different sites imagine simple monitoring system, and here are some of the ideas they came up with. For example, in northern Congo, indigenous people remember a traditional system similar to a simplified abacus. In Madagascar, they choose to use ropes and tie a knot on the rope for each animal they captured, and you can of course have different ropes to differentiate the different species. And in the DRC, the hunter decided to put rocks in jars or boxes for each animal hunted. And in the end, the data are regularly checked and discussed, and this helps hunters to take better management decisions. So then in Madagascar, the second game, which is about zoning, helped the community management committees to reflect on the current zoning of their territory. And after playing the game and discuss the result, they decided it needed to be simplified so that other people from the community can better understand and respect the rules for each kind of zones. So yeah, in the end, this presentation is well, quickly coming to an end. I'd like you to take away that the SWM program experiences with games. Yeah. So yeah, we have some resources for people. For people who would be interesting to use this approach, such as guides for different games, guidelines for the staff implementing in the field, the Kabo collects form, etc. So yeah, so as a takeaway, the SWM program's experiences with games have shown that they are excellent tools for engaging with communities and even other local partners, because they enable stakeholders to have open exchanges, to obtain information that is usually hidden, and to think together about solutions to the challenges we face, and create a real link between stakeholders. So several games have been created in the different sites with different approaches and desired outcomes. And we also want to add that we developed other games to engage with communities on other subjects, such as good practices for chicken farming, but this should be developed in a whole other presentation. So yeah, to conclude with this presentation, my main message is that games on sustainable hunting are a very powerful tool to enable field practitioners and local communities to work together to develop sustainable hunting plans. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, François. So do we have any questions? We've got a couple of minutes.
I thought that was so interesting. Thank you very much. Really great talk. What sprung to mind for me is that behavioural economists are always developing games to try to understand natural resource use. Most of them are done with American students in labs. Some of them are done with hunters, natural resource users in the field, but the questions and the kind of scenarios are generally externally developed. And I'm just wondering if you're thinking about working in a participatory way with the people about what are the questions that they would like to answer, and could they design themselves a behavioural game that would allow them to answer those questions? I think that would be a huge step forward in behavioural economics, actually.
Okay, thank you. As I said before, the different sites use different approaches. In DRC, Congo, Madagascar, we propose solutions to the hunters like optic monitoring system, zoning system, species selection, and they experience it directly. So this is, yeah, we propose some kind of reflection. We then, during the discussions, and the most interesting part of these games are the discussions that come after, and they bring up other problems that we can discuss, of course. The Gabon sites propose a kind of game, but then the hunters come up themselves with potential solution to achieve sustainability. But yeah, I agree that it could be, it's another approach to co-design the games with the communities, of course. We did this so far.
Great, I think we've got time for one more question. Any more questions? Oh yeah, Lauren, there's one over here.
Thank you. Were people keen to participate, or were they, reluctant and like looking at you like you're a weird guy wanting them to play a weird game?
Yeah, it's true that when we invite local communities and say, let's come play a game, sometimes they may think, who these people think we are like children. But then we explain that it's not a game, it's a way to discuss together about hunting or another subject. These games about hunting, actually they are not, well, they are more funny games, let's say. What I present is more like a demonstration of what could happen and how to implement it into the real world. the games about chicken farming and good practices is really fun. And in another presentation where it's included, I have a video where people are really laughing and having a good time because there is a real winner at the end. The winner is the people who have the most chicken in the end. And you can imagine like reward or anything, but it's well received generally. People are having fun, and yeah, I think it's very well received among the communities.
Great, thanks, François. Okay, so we've got one more presentation before we have a bit of a break. And then after this presentation, we'll also have a few extended, about 10 minutes or so for questions. So if you have any questions for any of the speakers that have popped to mind since you heard the presentations, then keep those, note those down. Okay, so our next speaker is Germain Aime Mavah, who is the SWM Coordinator for the WCS Congo Programme. And he's going to be presenting on sustainable hunting of resilient species, a case study of the Kabo hunting zone. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Germain Aime Mavah. I work for WCS in Congo Brazzaville program. Today, I'm going to present about sustainable hunting in an African lowland forest, a case study of the Kabo hunting zone. What is the problem? The first, we are talking about a case study of a hunting zone. What is the problem with this hunting zone? As we know, people in Congo, many speakers told, people in Congo hunt wildlife mainly for food, income, and cultural identity. Also, we know that in Congo, forest landscape include protected area and logging concession where people live and use wildlife. In this area, the overhunting can lead to the local depletion or total extinction because of many causes, population growth, food pressure, and so on. What we know also, wildlife use must combine food security, maintenance of biodiversity, and forest function. This is why we need to care about wildlife stuff. Well-designed of hunting management systems are done with local community. This is why understanding existing hunting system is a key to improve sustainability. To understand the existing systems, we carry out a survey for 160 hunters in 3 villages. And we carry out this study for 4 months with over 1,000 hunting trips. The Sustainable Wildlife Management Program in Congo is the EU funded. To manage, as we say, to manage hunting, we need baseline data. The question is where are we and where are we going? Before starting, we need to have baseline data. This means we collect baseline data on hunting techniques, on the species people hunted, on what people use these species, and we use Kabo toolbox like a tool to collect data. Some result, we need some indicators because I said that, where are we? This means to baseline data, we can set up indicators such as hunting effort in the free area zone. how long people go in the forest, and how many people in order to catch a species. Another indicator can be the hunting return rate. This means a biomass a hunter can have by hour in the free area. We also have another indicators about the capture by unit effort. And in the free area also, we have these indicators. From this indicator, we have some basic statistics with this hunting survey. Over 50 tons of bushmeat was harvested in 4 months. This is for 4 months. If you have 1 year, it may double. We also identify about 4,000 individual animals. According to the species, on the 4,000 species, 33% was small antelopes, ungulate like blue ducker. The antelope like the medium antelope, the medium antelope like Peter ducker was 24%. However, we have 70% of monkey, people hunt also. We also recorded about 80% of free bats, but all these free bats were caught in the single village. What is the message with all this as a conclusion? We now have much understanding of dynamics and challenge of hunting in this landscape. Also, with this data, we have many evidence we can talk with the local community and plan for a better management. Another message here is, we saw that there are a percentage of monkey, but this can be justified probably by the reduction of small, medium antelopes. This can show the hunting pressure in some villages. Also, we were interested about bat, finally. Why we were interested about the bat? Because of the possible risk of zoonotic disease. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Germain. Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions for Germain, and then we'll open the floor to any questions for any of the speakers.
Thank you very much. I'm not a specialist in wildlife, but I have a dilemma. In one side, you say biodiversity loss, and biodiversity loss is among the 5 challenges for wildlife fencing. And the other side, you say sustainable hunting, planning, there is a game also. So how you reconcile the two? Loss of biodiversity and promoting sustainable hunting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question, interesting question at the core of this presentation. What we are trying to explain here is, we have like Robert said, bushmeat in rural villages as a big explanation. This is, bushmeat give food for people. Bushmeat give income and is a cultural identity. What we are trying to look here is the balance between food for people, food security, and the health of ecosystem. Because if in the forest we don't have animals, people in the villages will lack food. We are trying to implement some strategies that can keep the balance between the need of food in the villages and also the restoration of ecosystem in the forest, which is animals are the part of these ecosystems. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. Very interesting. So my question has to deal with the comment you made on the last slide about you're particularly interested in bats because of the zoonotic disease risk. But I'm wondering, well, I understand, you know, different taxonomic groups have different biologies, etc. But you also mentioned that a fifth of the meat was primates, right? So I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that information and potential consequences of communication. So we saw during COVID-19 certain cases where bats were just persecuted, right? Unjustly. And we actually saw that in one presentation in a session recently. And so how are you thinking about that, how you're gonna communicate this information without running into this risk of overly focusing on the bats and maybe not putting pressure on, or increasing or removing pressure in other taxonomic groups, if that makes any sense?
Okay, thank you also for this question. Effectively, the problem with the bat now in the area we did this study is show the hunting pressure. This means people who are hunting the big species, like the big species are lacking, now they can catch the bat. However, bats are source of disease, as we know, but we are implementing a social marketing to try to explain to people the risk of catching bat. This is one level. And also, with the people, we are trying to do the environmental awareness to explain people how risky are these animals. Because people use yes, but people can say it's a culture, is what all people can say, but all these things can change. And also, we have this risk of the disease. But we have a program, what we call social marketing, to communicate with the people about bat issues.
Maybe one more question for Germain, if there's any more, and then we'll go on to the general Q&A. Okay.
Hi, I'd like to come back to the question of the legal rights as a basis for hunting management plans. Throughout the Congo Basin, there are many native indigenous tribes which have very little or even no legal rights whatsoever. For example, in Cameroon, the Baka, who live amongst the majority people, have basically even no rights to their own villages. So how are you going to achieve, how are we going to achieve legal rights, and what's the best strategy, and how realistic it is? Because as you said, it is the basis for sustainable hunting and for the management plans.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Yeah, of course, in the Sustainable Wildlife Program, the legal right is a big issue. For people who can read, I published lately, 2021, an article, Empty Law, Empty Forest. So with legal right, the problem is with the law, the old law gives people only the use right. But to use the natural resources, we need many rights. For example, the use right, the exclusion right, the management right. But what we are trying to do with the SWM, we did the right analysis. And now we are trying to make a plaidoyer with government to try to give a right to this community, that means indigenous people and local people, to manage their area. Because since a long time, this area was not managed by local people, because bushmeat, natural resources was state property. What we are trying, because the problem is about proprietorship. We need to give a proprietorship to the local people, including indigenous people. once these people have a right to manage their resource, I think they can also have the right to exclude other people in order to reduce the pressure on the natural resources such as wildlife. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Germain. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. Okay, so in the last session, we were talking more about the SWM programme and all of the sustainable hunting that's been, initiatives that have been implemented. So this is kind of really shifting track now. So as Mattia emphasised in his talk and has been mentioned a few times, urban demand for bushmeat is a big driver of decline in widespread defaunation across lots of Central Africa. So this is a bit of an overview presentation, really, about the Urban Bushmeat Project that's been one of WCS's key projects in DRC and Republic of Congo for the last few years, and with key funding from US Fish and Wildlife and ARCUS and the GCF Trade Hub and IWT. So these are all of my collaborators and colleagues that I wanted to mention, and there's many more. So just to kind of illustrate, so this was a map that we worked on recently for the National Geographic article, and you can come have a look at the article later. But just to show the vast kind of areas which bushmeat is coming from that is feeding the two cities of Brazzaville and Kinshasa. So collectively, those two cities, which are right next to each other and just separated by the Congo River, the population is almost approaching 20 million now. So Kinshasa alone has 17 million people. And a lot of those people, they still want to maintain their kind of cultural practices, which is eating wild meat. And so for that reason, the system is very different from what you're getting in rural areas. Because, so for example, the blue line here is the River Congo and the different tributaries to the River Congo. And that distance is up to 2,000 kilometers that bushmeat is traveling along that river. And it's also coming by road and it's going by air, so you can get fresh bushmeat kind of flown in. So this is meeting lots of different kind of segments of demand in the city, including the wealthy, it's all kind of wealthy consumption, but particularly, the fresh bushmeat that's flown in from areas. So all in all, there's a lot of bushmeat being brought into those two cities. So that's just a photo of the bushmeat that's coming from the River Congo, of all the boats that are coming into Maluku, and also, on the different roads coming down from northern Congo. So I think one thing that we need to think about is how do we really target our interventions according to these different contexts. So traditionally, WCS has worked a lot in the forest, protected area management, and working on things like, law enforcement and looking at livelihood activities and things like that. But you need to think about, there's different settings. So in the villages, wild meat is very much for, necessity in many cases. There just aren't the supply chains. And the same applies in areas such as forest camps, where you get kind of lots of people coming together in the forest, but there aren't those supply chains there to really provide them with a protein source other than wild meat. And then you get these provincial towns, which are still relatively connected to the forest. And so still often wild meat can be cheaper and more available than alternatives. But in the big city, you have wide availability of alternatives. So it's no longer a kind of a food security issue. It's very much a choice. So that's why it's, in some ways it's a low-hanging fruit, and not that behaviour change is easy, but there's definitely a need to kind of focus on that non-essential consumption. So in the three cities where we're focusing, which is Pointe Noire, Kinshasa and Brazzaville, these are the main consumed foods. Bushmeat or wild meat is not on that list. So the main, in various different orders, but it's fish, poultry, eggs, beans. Those are the main things that people are eating on a daily and weekly basis. So what WCS has been doing is developing this portfolio of interventions that target different systems along the supply from the forest to the fork, which is one of our kind of phases. So this is a combination of different projects that in total cover the different locations and the different situations. So like I said, based on the SWM program, the sustainable hunting, and all those kind of things, but then also looking at alternative protein supply routes and facilitating that. So that's necessary in places like the logging camps, but it's also necessary in these provincial towns. And then in the urban areas, there's a different suite of activities needed. And our project is actually one of the first that's really focused on urban areas. So we've been bringing together specialists, including criminologists, to look at the kind of the supply routes, investigating the legal framework, because often there is a gap as to what the legislation is in the cities, you know, who's actually responsible for enforcing that legislation, and also the demand and tackling the urban demand. So to be able to kind of unpick all these parts, we've developed this conceptual framework, which was published last year by Wieland et al. From the forest to the fork, to really dig deep into all of the different actors that are involved, what their motives are and things like that, so that we can kind of use that as a framework for really understanding the situation better. And I think that's what this project has really tried to do, is really look at, you know, why are people doing what they're doing, what are the barriers to them changing what they're doing, what is the kind of regulatory framework that needs to be amended to be able to control the system better, but also what are these kind of voluntary changes that we can encourage people to make, which is reducing consumption of bushmeat. So it's not stopping consumption, but it is about reducing. So some of the, we've done many different studies as part of the Urban Bushmeat Project and the GCF Trade Hub. So looking at consumers, including kind of citywide quantitative surveys, also kind of focus group studies, and various different in-depth interviews and things like that. So some of the kind of just key, a few just take-homes, I suppose, is, I mean, eating wild meat in the city is very much a social norm. So there's 85% of the people in these cities are eating wild meat. But what is different is it's varying degrees of frequency. So people are not having it weekly, they're having it, you know, less frequent. But then looking at perceptions of wild meat, it's perceived as natural, healthy, local, you know, and organic, people describe it as. So it's all of these things that often we look for in our food in various different parts of the world. And, you know, so bushmeat is one of the few things that's kind of locally produced, if you like, in some of these contexts. So there's cultural significance attached to it, and it's also a status symbol. So generally, when we're talking about, if we're looking at identifying frequent consumers of wild meat, that's people that eat it monthly or even quarterly. So there's very few people that can afford to eat wild meat in the city weekly or, you know, on a daily basis. It's very unusual. But the issue in the city is really the number of people in the city that are having it on that kind of infrequent basis. So the total numbers add up. So we also conducted studies in restaurants to understand more about the sale of bushmeat in restaurants. And that's partly because it's one of the more conspicuous places where you find bushmeat. And it's also kind of an indicator, like that openness is also an indicator of how freely it's consumed. So 25% of the restaurants across Brazzaville and Kinshasa were found to be selling bushmeat, which is quite a large proportion. And so when we, you know, kind of extrapolated from the data that we had, that works out about 10,000 bushmeat dishes consumed in Brazzaville and Kinshasa every day. And we know from the other surveys that we've done that represents about 16% of the total consumption of bushmeat in those cities, because the vast majority is consumed in the home. So yes, there's a wide availability, you know, that wide availability of bushmeat in restaurants helps to reinforce that social norm, because it is a very kind of overt consumption. But as such, but we also asked about like the business, you know, the reliance of these businesses on bushmeat, and there are very few that are really reliant on bushmeat, because most of them are selling it once a week, once every couple of weeks. You know, they're still, you know, similar to consumption. Most of these restaurants are selling other things primarily. So in some ways, they could be a good kind of collaborator to get them on board with any kind of behaviour change intervention. So one thing that we've tried to do is to really segment. So you've got the entire population of Kinshasa, which is 17 million. And, you know, but we need to try and, if you're going to influence behaviour, you really have to target certain groups. So we did with the consumer survey, we segmented the population essentially, based on two criteria. And this is similar to what we're now doing in Brazzaville. The two criteria are like the most frequent consumers, and also those most willing to change. So across all three cities, we found that the main consumers of bushmeat in terms of level of frequency, it tends to be older men, so 35 plus, high level education, higher income, kind of your formal sector workers. And But then kind of the next two groups in terms of frequency of consumption were the younger men, also higher education, and the younger women with a higher education. However, the latter two groups are probably more willing to change. And so part of the questions that we asked, we're trying to look at kind of psychographic factors and socio-demographic factors. So we were looking at willingness to try new foods and things like that. So on that basis, that's how we selected our targets. And this was all to inform our behaviour change campaign. So a range of the quantitative and the qualitative research went into designing this campaign, which Liliana is going to talk about shortly. But essentially this is what resulted, just a snapshot of some of the material. So it's a very positive campaign that's aligned with people's motivations and their identities and their values. And we have different campaign materials for the different segments. So the men over 35, the younger men, and the women, and also based on where they eat bushmeat. So trying to look at the situational context. So younger men were more likely to eat in the restaurants, for example. So another thing that we've been working towards in a number of different ways is reviewing and working towards potentially changing some of the national and international policies related to wild meat. So that is particularly important in the urban context, and also because there are many different laws. So we did a legal review. Pauline Polipoli, my colleague in DRC, worked on a legal review in DRC. And there were 60 different laws that he identified that were all relevant, some of which are contradicting each other. And some of them are, at different levels and different, kind of responsibility for enforcing them. So there needs to be a more aligned policy in relation specifically to wild meat, particularly since that crosses across multiple different sectors. It's a food at the end of the day, even though we're looking at it from a wildlife perspective. And this is another study that was done by one of our colleagues in the GCF Trade Hub, Jaya, from UNEP, that was looking even broader, looking at all the different kind of policies that can affect wild meat, going from kind of rural development type policies to international trade policies. So things that are affecting the importation or the production of alternative proteins in country. So often the importation actually undermines local supply because it undercuts, etc., in terms of cost. So this is basically a rapid overview of some of the things that we've been working on. But I think these are all avenues that it's going to be interesting to pursue further. And just a few takeaways then. So firstly, it's super important to target interventions. They need to be based on a detailed analysis of the context at each individual site, and that's why we've kind of repeated our surveys across each of the cities that we work to make sure that we pick up on those differences, even if they are subtle. There needs to be more focused and long-term investment in reducing urban demand. So I think we need to move away from thinking you can do a 3-month campaign and change people's behaviour. It's a longer-term activity, but it's really important that we've started this and that we can move forward implementing these, kind of building on the messaging in these campaigns, because that is what's going to have an impact longer term on urban demand. And making sure that you really segment the audience. If you target everyone, you target no one. So really think about who your audiences are, and then work with them and looking at the different motives, values and identities that they associate with. And just finally, that wild meat, like I said, is a cross-cutting issue. So we should be working across sectors to see how we can find the solutions. So these are the many donors that have been involved. So thank you.
I'm sure we do have tons of questions for Juliet.
Excellent talk, thank you. You mentioned in one slide that 85% of city dwellers eat wild meat, whilst it is at the same time a status symbol. I mean, a status symbol for 85% of people, how does that go together? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, it's quite different from something like rhino horn, which is such a premium price that no one can, apart from like the elite, can really afford it. I mean, so bushmeat is sold in different size portions. It's sold in different ways. You can get smoked and fresh bushmeat. So all of those things will affect the price and the availability. But ultimately, lots of people have it, but often they are having it like once a year. So it really is kind of a special occasion thing. So when we're talking about status, it's those people that can afford to eat it more regularly. And also, often the comments that we'll get back is, well, you can buy a small piece of bushmeat for me, or, lots and lots of fish for the whole family. So it's more in terms of, those kind of things that people are judging on. So it is more open access than a lot of illegal wildlife trades, for sure. The more people can, and it's also a case of if people have the opportunity to eat it, they will eat it. because it is a social norm right now and it is desirable. But there's just limits as to how much people can afford. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk again. I'm sorry, I missed your very first few slides, but what's the maximum distance and time that carcasses can travel from the place of hunting to Brazzaville and Kinshasa?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I mean, we're talking, I think it's 2,000 kilometers along the river. And, you know, in terms of time, that can be weeks. I think it's 2 to 3 weeks sometimes, depending on the type of vessel that people are traveling on.
Are they refrigerated? Or what?
No, it's generally smoked. So there's no refrigeration on these vessels, but
the monkeys on your pictures on the street market, they don't. I mean, they look fresh, right?
Yeah, so some of them will be. So that's why there's different, you know, there's different routes. Some of them won't be coming so far up the river, but then some will be coming by road. Some will be flown in. So I think there's a combination of different things, but the ones that are coming that distance all the way from the end, you know, the only way to conserve that is smoking it.
And flown in is smuggled, right? Flown in is illegal, is flown in.
I mean, all of the legality of this is a very grey area, yeah. I mean, essentially, you could argue that none of this is really legal because, you know, you can't prove the origin. You know, often it's hunted using material like guns and things that are outlawed according to the laws at the moment. So it's but it functions as pretty much a legal trade right now.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more.
Thank you very much, Juliet. One of the things I'm most excited about in terms of the research you talked about is the scale, right? So these big urban areas. And I was wondering if you could just say a few words about the challenges you've come across when it comes to doing research at that bigger, broader urban scale.
Good question. I mean, there were quite a lot of challenges, really. You know, I mean, like we're used to doing consumption surveys at household level in a kind of relatively small village, where you can easily get the same people again, and you know, so we've tried. You know, we've been trying different things in Kinshasa. So we've initially we did a street intercept survey. So we had 1 kilometre square plots randomly distributed across the city as if it was a huge forest, you know, but in the urban environment, and sending off the teams, so led by Divin Vuakere, who's here, to basically map out everything in those squares so that we could try and get as representative as possible a sample of both consumption and also the restaurants and the markets and other things that we were looking at. But there were challenges with all of these things because, particularly when our target group are often in an office during the day. So we tried using mobile phones as well so we've been working with a company called Viamo to do kind of mobile phones for the impact evaluation of the campaign. So that's the automated voice response survey. So that's opened up some opportunities like that, but we also find that there is a bit of a male bias with mobile phone use. So I wouldn't, you know, so there are some caveats with these different methods, but you know, that's the reality of working in a city like Kinshasa, because it's also not entirely safe all the time, you know. So there's those kind of situations we have to take into consideration as well. But yeah, we're developing a toolbox of methods, which I'm happy to talk to people about. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juliet. We're now going to move on to looking at some of the disease risks that are associated with consumption of wild meat. And we have Thibaut, who's a researcher at CIFOR, who's going to be telling us about that.
Okay, hi everybody. The title of my presentation, Understanding Risk of Disease Transmission in the White Meat Food Chain from Forest to Fork in Cameroon. My presentation takes advantage of results from the White Meat Handling Project, financed by the GIZ and put in place by CIFOR and FOREP. Okay, in terms of context, we all know about, we have been discussing about it. We now know the importance of white meat in the food habit of community in sub-Saharan Africa. We know how important it is for them, and it is even crucial for their food security. But we should not forget about the zoonosis issue, the risk of zoonosis that this consumption poses. So we know Robert has been talking about COVID-19. We can also think about Ebola, we can think about Marburg, we can think about monkey fever. So all of that raises the question, how can we prevent disease transmission? And that is why this project arises with the aim of understanding how the behaviors of communities expose them to the risk of disease transmission, that is from the white meat to the actors involved in the food chain, from the forest to the fork. So we went to the community and we discussed with them. We worked with hunters, we worked with food preparers, we worked with food vendors, and also with consumers to understand how their behaviors can favorize, can allow the transmission of the diseases. So for our survey, because we carried out survey, we worked around the Dia Faunal Reserve in Cameroon, and also around the Bumba Bek National Park, also in Cameroon. So we worked, we did a survey, we did focus group, we worked with vendors also in Bushmeat market, and we worked in 4 main areas, 4 main sites, that is Yukaduma. Yukaduma is around the Bumba Bek National Park, Bembis Lomier in Mintum is around the Dia Reserve. We worked with 2,376 respondents, and we tried to have a balance between female and male respondents. Okay, so that work happened last year, and these are some of the results that we got from our work. It is interesting for us to see those risky behaviors, and some of them include the hunting of animals that show signs of disease. You will see in bubbles some of the sayings of community, and that gives us an insight of why they have some behaviors. And you see when they say they hunt animals, though the animals show signs of disease, they believe that cooking the animal will kill the disease in the meat. Sometimes they will say those diseases cannot get them because they feel like they are strong, or the forest is protecting them from the disease. So they will not care in hunting animals that show signs of disease. Also, some of them said, 50% of them said they eat and they sell also, when the opportunity comes, animals that they find dead in the forest. And when they sell sometimes the animal that they find dead in the forest, it's because they have found that the animal is too bad for them to eat, like decomposed animal. So they cook, they smoke the meat and they sell it. Some of them also say that they eat raw meat or they drink blood of animal. And that was mainly the Baka that use blood of animal. And the use of blood of animal does not only include consumption, but also for traditional purposes. Like some of them believe that blood of animal can make them stronger or luckier while hunting. And some of them believe it is a traditional medicine, can be used in traditional medicine. But it's also interesting to see that not only Baka use blood of animals, only Baka use blood of white meat, but we had some Bantus who told us that they were using blood of domestic animals for consumption sometimes, and also for medical issue, for medical purposes. And also we discussed today of some species that are risky, like bats, and we had 28% of our respondents that mentioned about hunting bats. 50% mentioned about hunting of rodents including poached rat, Amish poached rat, cane rat, and which are quite risky, and also primates, which we know that are reservoir of some bad diseases like Ebola. Okay, and talking about primates, in the picture, we can have a case which is interesting, and that shows that it's not only about consumption, but also about the very factor of handling the white meat, which can allow the transmission of the disease. We can see on the picture someone who has been bitten in 1997, and that picture was taken in 2022. And as we can see, the wound has not yet healed. And that shows the risk posed by the handling of the animals. This man was just careless. He was handling the animal on his elbow, believing the animal was dead, but the animal was not, and the animal bit him. The animal was a petty-nosed monkey. So we have seen why it's important to consider the question of white meat handling because of the risk it poses on zoonosis transmission. So our way forward, we are going to carry out in the framework of our project a social and behavioral change campaign. And during this campaign, we are first going to collect data on behaviors of community. And after the time allotted for the campaign, we are going to carry out another survey to understand how our work has influenced the community. We are also going to collect samples from animals, like, for example, this petty-nosed monkey, to understand why are the potential virus, bacteria, microorganisms that those animals carry that can be dangerous for us. And we are also in the process of producing a paper. Thank you.
Who has some questions for Thibaut? We've got time for a couple. Brilliant.
So my name is Richard Premack. So in your talk and the other talks that I've heard in this series so far, have people done studies of to what extent this hunting is not sustainable? Is this hunting reducing the population of animals to the point where they might go locally extinct?
Okay, thank you for your question. I believe it was not the purpose of our study, but other study, we probably agree that hunting is not more sustainable. So to answer your question, really, there is a problem with hunting in Cameroon and other places in sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you, Cedric. That was very interesting. I was wondering, has there ever been a serious zoonotic disease outbreak in Cameroon? And do you think that something like that would potentially change behaviors?
Okay, interesting question. In some discussion with community, we had the opportunity to heard of some cases of Ebola in some area in the southeast part of Cameroon. And the people mentioning about it were saying their behaviors, consumption of white meat and apes especially, changed, actually because they were afraid of the disease. But that was from those who had the information. For those who do not have the information, they did not care, though they were around the same community. Also, the COVID-19, during the COVID-19 outbreak, the population was sensitized about the risk of eating pangolin, thinking pangolin could be a reservoir for the disease. And some of them changed their eating habits, especially concerning pangolin, but they were eating other species without any difference. Okay.
Thanks. To try to answer Richard's question, I mean, sort of, what is happening is that you have a sort of an extinction filter so that's the first thing to disappear is the large species with low reproductive rate. And so if you have gorilla, chimpanzee, large antelope, they are the first to disappear. And then you go down the chain and ultimately you are left with squirrels and small rodents. And we see that in a very long temporal study that people have done in the market in Ghana, according to, so they show that they have this extinction filter. The different situation that you have in the Congo Basin, that there is still a lot of source area. So this effect of extinction filter, which is very visible in Ghana because there is only agriculture and protected forest, is much more diffused in most of the Congo Basin because you are still a source sink effect, so that you have more animals to come back. But ultimately, if we continue as it is now, there is going to be extirpation, extension, local and global. That's why we try to see, okay, what can we do about that?
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks very much, Thibaut. So next we're moving on to looking at the increasing online trade in wild meat, and we have Divin Vuakere, who's from WCS, to come and talk.
Okay, thank you a lot, Lauren. My name is Divin Vuakere. Okay. My name is Divin Vuakere. I'm from Kinshasa. Today, I am delighted to present to you the result of our research entitled From the Forest to Facebook, investigating the role of online marketplace in the trade of wild meat in West in Central Africa. Our objectives are to assess the extent and the characteristics of online commerce on Facebook in West and Central Africa, to identify and analyze the Facebook account, and to propose a policy for regulating the sustainability of the wild meat trade in West in Central Africa. Concerning our methodology, we create a Facebook account for this research, and through the search bar, we used different keywords as wild meat, viande de brousse in French and in English, and we found a different account, a private account, and a page, groups selling bushmeat in Facebook. And we collect information about location of account founded in West in Central Africa. And also we collect all image, text, and video of wild meat in the account founded. And also we collect all publications posted between 2012 till 2022. And we collect information about followers and subscribers. And we found 71 Facebook accounts in 7 countries, and Ivory Coast and Nigeria are the 2 countries are most represented. We collect a total of 1,388 images offering wild meat in the account founded, and through the account founded, the image founded, we identified 71 species, and the top 10 of the species most advertised, we have the greater cane red, African bush trail porcupine, Gambian bush red, long-tailed pangolin, blue duiker, treed pangolin, red-flanked duiker, bushback, Maxwell duiker, African rock python. Those are the 10 most species most advertised online on Facebook, founded. Referring to the IUCN Red List, we assess the status of the species found identified, and the top 3 of the most species have with the high risk of threat. We have the first treed pangolin, which is endangered, followed by Gabon viper vulnerable, and long-tailed pangolin, which is vulnerable also. And we collect 747 comments. Through the comment, we subdivide these all comments into 5 groups, and 50% of comments are about price, method of payment, and method of delivery. And about the process on Facebook, this trading is subdivided by two persons. The first is the administrator, who is a seller, who posts picture of wild meat to insert member, to propose the price, propose the delivery method, and propose the method of payment, and display also a phone number to receive orders, and tell those interested to continue discussion in private message. And the second side is a subscriber who is a potential client, post a comment to express interest, contact the administrator in a private message, and remind the administrator that they are waiting for a response. And to sum up, wild meat is effectively commercialized online on Facebook in West and Central African countries. Many species of wild meat are involved in this trade. Online sales are concluded at home or to restaurants, and it is difficult to control and estimate the quantity of wild meat sold, and it needs to be further regulated. We would like to thank all partners who are supporting this research. Thank you a lot.
Many thanks, Divin. Do we have questions? We must have questions.
Thanks. I mean, I'm really concerned by if you go back the graph of the number of posts, and this one. I mean, the thing seems to be growing very, very fast. So is it something that we think it's going to explode the market? Is it the new way, or is just, okay, we just have not enough data?
Okay. Yes, it is, as we can see, from 2013 till 2022, there is an increasing of image. And it is about, first, the accessibility of people on internet from the past years till nowadays. And also, it is about the user, the people who can easily use different material as a mobile phone or a computer to navigate in the part of Africa, because in the past it was difficult between today, and we can see again there is a lot of reason about it, but we think in 2022 a lot of image was posted because many people use online for selling a lot of things as a goods, and a lot of traders migrate online on Facebook to do also this trading online, and we are working on that to know more about the main reason for that. Yeah.
Thanks. I was wondering how specific this is to Facebook. So, for example, if you were able to get all of these sellers banned from Facebook, do you think they would be able to be as effective on another social media platform or on WhatsApp or something like that? And do you think these other platforms are already being used in addition to Facebook?
Okay, through the comment collected, we did not find any evidence about it, but we know that the administrator show a phone number to say to the potential client to discuss with them in private message. We suppose that through this phone number it can be by another social as WhatsApp or another, but we did not find any evidence about it of all data collected.
If I can add something, I went to a whole set of talks yesterday, which was on it was use of various internet search tools or communication tools for illegal trade in various things like sea fans and so on and so on. And they all have a graph like that. They're all increasing a great deal, probably partially because of the ease of access to internet. You could, about 3 years ago, you could get a mobile phone in Gabon for a tenner, for like £10. And I think there was an Indian intervention, and most of the sales were on YouTube, which is the most commonly used social media thing in India. Somebody else looked at the different types of data collection from Google or from Twitter or from, I think, TikTok, and then something else. And for that one, I think it was mostly Google. So I think it depends on the time and the place, but everybody's at it.
Thanks for that, Boo. I think we'll close the questions there. So thanks very much, Divin. That was really interesting. So next up we have Eric Manna, and he's going to be looking at the type of behavioural change interventions that might influence wild meat traders.
Thank you, Lauren. So thank you all for coming. So I'll be talking about scenario-based interventions that could possibly elicit behavior change in urban areas. So very rapidly, bushmeat, as you know, is a very controversial issue in Central Africa, in all Africa, because for some, it's a food security issue, while for others, especially in urban areas, it's a livelihood issue. We're talking here particularly of the very poor people in urban areas, especially the women, who are very poorly educated, who have no other means of earning money. So bushmeat gives them financial independence, and bushmeat makes them less reliant on their husbands. So it's an important source of livelihood. But also, we know for others also in urban areas, it's a way to stay rooted in their cultures and traditions. Because we know for the urban wealthy, it's a luxury item. So throwing out at a party and having some bushmeat dishes is prestigious. And so, as we've seen in previous talks, this urban demand is driving the bushmeat crisis because it's causing species to be depleted. And so the hunting is very unsustainable. As studies have shown that the trade in urban areas is estimated close to 100 million euros in Cameroon alone. And that was about 2012. And as we know that Central Africa has the fastest demographic expansion, we can imagine that by 2050, we'll have not just 5 million tons, as it is known now, to be consumed yearly. We may get to 20 million metric tons. You know what that means? It means we end up with empty forest. And so studies have shown that by the turn of this century, Africa may lose 50% of its bird and mammal species. So that's a serious cause for concern. But it's not just an ecological problem, as we've just seen, it's also a health problem. As we've seen, people can get serious diseases, as most of the species which carry most of the pathogens are also the most trafficked. That is the bush pigs, the monkeys. Imagine a scenario in which we get a pandemic which is airborne like COVID, and which kills like Ebola. Nobody wants to live in that kind of world. When people continue to manipulate bushmeat, we may find ourselves living there. Just imagine COVID-19 was instead Ebola. Almost all of us here would have been dead. So we don't want that kind of scary scenario. And so in this research, my focus was first on profiling the actors in the urban supply chain, knowing what roles they play. And then concerning women, as I told you, it gives them a way to make a decent living. So where do they fit in the supply chain? And most importantly, third, what kind of conservation interventions would not only reduce the volume of wild meat traded, but stop people from selling protected species. And so my focus in this was mostly in middle actors, because most of the research on bushmeat in urban areas, and even in rural areas, we focus first on the hunters, and then most recently on the demand side. but the roles of the actors in the middle part of the chain, that is the market vendors, still remains largely unknown. So profiling these people and knowing how interventions could bring them to reduce the amount of bushmeat they trade could somehow be a starting point to solve this bushmeat crisis. So this study was focused in two main areas, in Cameroon and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are the two biggest countries in Central Africa. DRC, with close to 16 million inhabitants. In Cameroon, about 4 million inhabitants. And data was collected in the two capital cities because in the literature it has been proven these are the main hubs where bushmeat is traded. And then data collection was in two phases. The first phase was a scoping phase in which we had to obtain qualitative data from law enforcement, from civil society organizations helping law enforcement, but also from market traders in order to know what interventions are actually in place and which interventions are actually being prepared. Because this study, as you see, is quite timely. In this region, most of the countries are actually considering revising their wildlife laws, which are still unfit. In DRC, there's talk about it, but in Cameroon, it's quite advanced. There's a draft already prepared, and which will soon be submitted to Parliament. So getting information in it to inform policy will be very helpful as the right laws can be put in place, which will be acceptable by all stakeholders. And so this scoping phase led to a further phase in which more target interventions could now be designed and could be used to interview market traders in order to know which interventions could actually elicit behavior change. So the scoping study actually showed that with law enforcement, policies and interventions they consider putting in place, they have like stepping up law enforcement by increasing the number of checkpoints, increasing penalty rates. They also consider the possibility that maybe to solve this issue, some people, maybe most of the traders, can be authorized to sell non-protected species. Because you know that in these countries, animals are classified, wildlife classified into three categories. Class A, which are totally protected, they can't be hunted. Class B are partially protected, can be hunted with a permit. And Class C, they are not protected, but the people can hunt them just for subsistence. But also, the states in these countries do not forbid people from selling bushmeat. There's a procedure for obtaining permits, but it's just that it's too complicated and costly. That's why the traders don't even bother. And so, when you talk to the rangers, they tell you, bushmeat they know sold in markets because it's sold openly. It's not like it's something which is hidden. But then they say they know all that bushmeat is illegal because they know none of those traders has a permit. And then the civil society, in DRC, they're mostly focusing on the demand reduction campaign, as we just heard right now. And then also, in the parts of Cameroon, they consider what they call diversifying livelihoods. I don't like using alternatives because actually all the different projects, all the different interventions, they're not able to provide alternatives. These are not alternatives. You can somehow diversify your livelihoods, but it's hard to substitute actually what these people do. And then when I talk to the market traders, they tell you if demand should drop, then they will drop out of the trade. And so if prices also of domestic meat should increase, why it increased? Because for the past 2 years, we have observed that the cost of domestic meat like beef and chicken has been rising. And if this continues, we can end up in a scenario in which we have domestic meat equaling the price of bushmeat. What will happen? So based on this, we could design 5 scenarios with some had a conditionality added to them, and then we could interview these traders in order to get a response of which ones will actually work. And so, we just finished data collection, so results are quite preliminary, but already first results show that profiling the traders, we have 4 different categories of traders in urban areas. We have the intermediaries, that the middlemen, they get bushmeat from the rural areas, hunters, and they supply the urban markets. Then you have the large-scale retailers, they get from the intermediaries, and the supply traders. An interesting thing to note here, the intermediaries and the large-scale retailers, the majority men, 8 out of 10. And they make the lion's share of the profit. But then the market traders, which are, you see, majority women, 8 out of 10 are also women here, in this case, 2 out of 10 here are men. They make the least profit. So it appears men, they leave this side of the trade to women. That's why we go to bushmeat markets, you mostly see the women sitting there. The men don't sit there because they make the money from supply chain. Then we also have another group of actors, they call them meat cleaners. These are young people, usually students. They find it as a way to earn some money to meet intermittent needs. So they're able to supply wealthy people at their homes, housewives, and restaurants. And then we found that 3 scenarios could possibly affect the relative profit which traders make. This is a successful demand reduction campaign, stepping up law enforcement, and also diversifying livelihoods. But then we found that should in case the cost of domestic meat should equal that of bushmeat, it will be a disaster because we have the opposite effect. We also found that 3 scenarios could reduce overall the volume of bushmeat traded, the same 3 scenarios, but one could potentially stop all the traders from selling protected species, either the stepping up law enforcement, in which the state works in hand with local NGOs, because if only the state, we know corruption gets in. And so in conclusion, I would say we recommend, based on the preliminary data, that diversification of livelihoods to support especially female traders in urban areas is highly needed. So government should think about putting in place policies and support actions for this much urban poor living on the fringe of society. And then stepping up law enforcement would significantly affect the trade. That would be a starting point in solving this crisis. But also, most importantly, a successful and widespread demand reduction campaign will be very effective. And this has to be done regularly, and it should be widespread. So the next steps will be finalize analysis and getting a paper, and most importantly, organize high-profile meetings. I was just organized one last month, in which we brought for the first time in Cameroon around the same table policymakers, law enforcement, also local actors, to discuss how we can make the trade sustainable and which revisions should be brought that all stakeholders will make it acceptable. It was agreed that a national bushmeat strategy should be developed, and that's one thing we should also work on. And so, based on this, I thank you for your attention, and this study was part of a much larger project, the TradeUp project, funded by the UKRL GCRF TradeUp, and based in University of Oxford. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Eric. Who's got questions? Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for the really interesting talk. Could you speak to us a little bit more about the preliminary results on how you determined what would be most effective in reducing demand? Was that based on interviews with those different individuals alone, or was there some other sort of kind of analysis or projection that you did to come up with those ideas?
Thank you, Brock. That's a good question. Actually, that was based on the responses which the traders gave. Because in the scenario, it's a kind of game in which you expose each trader to potential situation and try to get how they react in case that should happen. So, for example, if the SWCS succeeded in a successful demand reduction campaign, and then the demand dropped because people started eating less bushmeat, then how would the traders react in that case? So for most, unfortunately, there was a scenario recently in which Ebola hit badly that area, and so most of the traders would tell you, in that scenario, either to stop selling bushmeat completely, waiting for demand to rise again, or they simply, especially those who had other sources of livelihood, they focus on the other source of livelihood. So it's based on that that we're able to know which interventions will actually have an effect.
Oh, thank you very much. One thing I'm just curious about is, I know for bushmeat, palatability, the taste is something that people really are attached to. So is there a scenario where, here, for example, we have the veggie burgers, where you can mimic it and make some else? Is there a way you can make some sort of a vegetarian taste of bushmeat, or is anybody looking into that?
I think that's a nice question. That's actually one avenue we may think of investigating. We know Central Africa is a culture deeply rooted in meat consumption, so they eat a lot of meat. So if you can find a way in which you can mimic the taste of bushmeat, so people can eat it and still think it's bushmeat, maybe that may work. But for sure, I can tell you, if the people know it is not bushmeat, that also be another problem. Because they'll eat it, but they'll tell you we still want the authentic bushmeat. I think there were cases in which a domestication project was started in Côte d'Ivoire, and then they realized that for cane rats, they thought they could somehow substitute, provide domesticated cane rats as alternatives. But they realized for some consumers, they said, it's good, but these cane rats were bred like domestic animals. You treated them so they're no longer natural. So they said the taste can no longer be the same. They want the ones not found in the forest, that feed on grass, and that taste from the forest. So this is quite complex.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. The intervention you seem to propose are very much at the end of the value chain, whereas you tell us that the people that are making most of the money are in fact higher upstream in the value chain. They are intermediaries, I mean, sort of. And I think that if we want to have some hope of success in reducing the urban demand, we should find a way to cut the chain before the meat reaches the town also, not simply when it's in town. So the question is that how can we make the life of the intermediaries or the retailer difficult and make the bushmeat more expensive for them, so that ultimately they are driven out of the business because then the end product is too expensive. And of course, I mean, the very important point, I mean, it's sort of at the end of the value chain, you have women, and you don't want them to lose their livelihood, so.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Quite complex. But actually, I think as I showed, one intervention that have a significant effect is stepping up law enforcement. Because by increasing law enforcement, they're increasing number of checkpoints between rural to urban roads. So the law enforcement is not just in urban areas, but also in rural areas. And so we realize that in rural areas, with increased number of checkpoints, you're not affecting the traders, market traders, you're affecting the intermediaries that also actually supply from the hunters to the market traders. But usually we realize that when you have checkpoints in which it's just state rangers, because they're poorly paid and because they're in bad conditions, they tend to get corrupt. So they tend to somehow connive with some of the traders, and so they can even inform the traders beforehand that there are checkpoints here, so avoid or try to stay and come one day later on. But then we have these mixed checkpoints in which you have not law enforcement, but also civil society organizations that, because I believe in that case, it will be hard to somehow corrupt them. And in that kind of scenario, it will be hard for law enforcement to take bribes. So that will make their life very difficult. I interviewed also few intermediaries, there are not many. But to them, when you suggested increasing number of checkpoints, they found it as horror. They said, no, that was a very bad scenario. If you do that, then definitely they'll stop until the situation gets better. So that's one way. But then, as you said in the second question, that can affect the livelihoods of the urban poor, the women. So diversifying, that's why there was a scenario about providing diversified livelihoods. That is, these women could be asked what kind of activities they want to undertake, given training for about 6 months, and then provided a starting capital. That could somehow help them to somehow tackle the issue of losing the bushmeat supply.
For the checkpoint, I mean, sort of one thing what is happening also in real life is that it's, unfortunately, at the checkpoint, you are not only catching the retailer with things, you're also catching the poor guy that is having blood dwickers to feed the family. And unfortunately, they are very often treated the same. So we should make a difference. And someone killing one blood dwicker for the family and someone carrying a truckload of things. Unfortunately, the one carrying a pickup full of things has more money to bribe the checkpoint than the other one.
Yeah, thank you. That's why, as I said, last month we had a meeting it was the first time we brought down this one table, all these different stakeholders. And so the idea was to somehow find a way to regulate the market. And for example, in Cameroon, we know now that like local councils are very powerful based on the constitution that was modified in 1996. And gradually it's being implemented. It's true since that constitution was ratified. The president, so since it was voted in parliament, the president never ratified it. It's recently is gradually ratifying parts of it. But then, if at the council level, local mayors could create official bushmeat markets, because the state does not forbid people from selling bushmeat. It's just that the procedure is too complicated, traders don't bother to get it. And in these official bushmeat markets, they could officially register traders who will sell only non-protected species, and they could also register supply people in middlemen who will supply these markets and could trace out where that bushmeat will come from. That will significantly solve the issue of getting bribes, of increasing of checkpoints. So that can be a way in which you can help the poor people. Let's say the poor guy who wants to get like 1 or 2 animals to supply in the market to survive, and some other individual who was like given money by some powerful untouchable in the cities, because that's also one issue which I should say here, because I also noticed in this research there are some law enforcement agents, some high-profile people who invest in the bushmeat trade. They give money to the traders to buy bushmeat and sell because they know it has a rapid turnover. And so it's difficult for someone who invests in an activity to stop that activity. But if you can get local councils to organize themselves, and these councils will now be the ones to apply for permits for the traders. And the traders now pay them a tax to reimburse that permit. That can set a system of traceability, of control of what enters into the market, and even of the quotas, and of where the meat is sourced. So that, I'm not saying it's the silver bullet, but that will be a milestone that can somehow maybe cover that situation.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
And that brings us on to our last talk, but it feeds in really nicely because Liliana Vanegas is going to come and talk to us about the behavioural change campaigns that WCS has been running in, where we are, DRC and Madagascar, am I right?
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you for the people to stay in for this last presentation in this interesting symposium. So I want to talk and share with you about the work that we are doing with all the team to reduce wild meat consumption through a behavior change approach. And we have 2 types of experience. So we have the experience from Central Africa, where we are working in reduce urban demand, and in Madagascar, where we are working in the diversification of the livelihoods, and with the behavior change approach, we are promoting these new livelihoods. So in Central Africa, we work in 2 cities. The first one was in Pointe-Noire. It was a pilot campaign. And then with the learning from Pointe-Noire, we designed, produced, and diffused a campaign in Kinshasa. So Kinshasa is a huge city. So some data talk about from 14 million of inhabitants to 17 or 20 million sometimes of inhabitants in Kinshasa, so it's a huge city. And this huge population represents also a huge demand for wild meat. In Madagascar, that is completely different context related to our work. We are working near to the Makira National Park in the north of Madagascar, and here what we are trying to do is to invite people to start in the farming of the local chicken and fish. In Central Africa, our conceptual model is from the forest to the fork, and with this conceptual model, we are targeting consumers, and we believe that by reducing the demand, we are also helping the threats on Central Africa wildlife to be reduced. In Madagascar, as I mentioned before, it's about livelihood, diversification, and sustainable wildlife management. Oh. I lost some of my emojis. But in terms of the theory, so we are using for our campaigns the theory, planning, behavior. We have 3 different stages, so we wanted to go step by step. The first step is about behavioral intentions. So for us, it was the campaign introduction, provide capacity to the users of the campaign, and our key message here was about how to easily offer and prepare traditional cuisine without wild meat. In terms of the platforms, for Kinshasa, we work in social media, and in Madagascar, because they have not too access to social media, we develop cooking recipes books where we explain how to keep a traditional alimentation, but using other proteins. In the stage 2, our objective was what we wanted. It was people wanted to try the new behavior, so reducing wild meat consumption. And our key message here, it was an invitation to be part of the new, interesting, and trendy way to eat. And for this stage, we use TV spots, radio spots, and also social media. And final, the third stage of our theory was the social norms. So we wanted people to show the new trend exists and their advantage, and also to show that they are part of this new conservation movement. The message here was an attractive emerging trend in Kinshasa, for example, not to eat wild meat, and for Madagascar it was about be proud to be a farmer. In terms of the platforms, we use radio spots, TV spots, and also social media in Kinshasa. And for Madagascar was community videos, meeting when we presented the videos, and also radio spots. In terms of our methodology, so we have a 6-step methodology. We start with all the formative research strategy. It's very important when we are talking about behavior change to understand the specific context analysis of each site. As I mentioned, it's not the same thing to develop a behavior change campaign in Kinshasa than the work that we are doing also in the rural area near to the Makira National Park in Madagascar. Then, with this information from the research, we worked in the campaign design, so how we want to position the campaign and the branding. For example, for our campaigns, we decide to have a very positive branding when we are not just saying that the consumer is bad because he is eating wild meat, but inviting him to be part of a new trendy movement that is eating less wild meat in the city. The next 2 stages were prototypes production and pretesting. We are pretesting our prototypes with our target audience, and then the final production and the campaign launch. For the Kinshasa campaign, so we already launched the campaign, so we have some materials from the Kinshasa campaign, but for Madagascar, we are in the stage of the final production. All along the process of the campaign production, we have the monitoring and evaluation component that is very important for us in terms to evaluate the feedback from the users of the campaign, and we have also the key stakeholders engagement, because we can do behavior change alone. We need to work with different key stakeholders. Some few points that I want to highlight here to understand better the position and the conception of our campaigns. I know that the other speakers already talk about the research and about the wild meat dynamics in urban and rural context. But just to remember, so for example, in Pointe-Noire and in Kinshasa, wild meat is perceived as natural, healthy, local, but it's also a non-essential product in terms of food security, even if we acknowledge and recognize the socio-cultural importance for the urban consumers. But in Makira, in the zone near to Makira National Park, it's about availability, so it's very different. Another difference is that wild meat in Pointe-Noire and Kinshasa is generalized and is socially accepted. So for example, in cities like Pointe-Noire and Kinshasa, you can find wild meat in all types of restaurants and sold openly in the markets. In the region, in Madagascar, when we are working, we also found that some species are eaten or consumed just with family and friends because people understand very well that they are eating a protected species. Something important is that for our campaigns, women are very important because they can influence what all the family is eating at home. So we found that all the women, Pointe-Noire, Kinshasa, and Madagascar, are open to prepare domestic meat or other alternative proteins, but need some conditions. So this needs to be easy for these guys to prepare. This needs to be possible to continue to prepare their traditional recipes, and these women need to, family likes what they prepare because it's very important, the acceptation of their families, well recognized like a good wife. And finally, for the Madagascar target audience, we found that the women, men, and young are keen to become farmers, but they still need some support. So after all the research work that my colleagues did and presented today in the symposium, we found 3 different target audience for Kinshasa. So we have 3 target audience with high level of education. That is also an indicator of high level of income. So we have men between 35 and 55 years old. Our second segment are the young men between 18 and 34 years old, and finally the young woman between 18 and 34 years old. In Madagascar, we also found 3 different target audience. So they are the most important actors for our behavior change campaign. So we have the household heads, the men, and we have also the women, the housewives that are often associated with the first segment, and then we have young female and male. In terms of the conception of our campaigns, the first thing to highlight is the need to reframe conservation. So for example, in Kinshasa, people was tired about bad messages, and people think that conservation is not possible from the cities and that conservation needs to happen in the forest. So with our campaign, we are inviting citizens in Kinshasa to be part of a new trendy movement. And we are also inviting them to learn to prepare, eat, order without wild meat. And we are also saying them that they are not alone and that the campaign is there to guide these guys and to work together to the new behavior. In Madagascar was about go step by step with the users of the campaign, present them farmers as local heroes, and also just accompany the behavior change. The next stage that was very important for us in terms of the methodology was the pretesting with the target audience. So this graphic is the first of the materials that we produce in our pilot campaign in Pointe-Noire, and this and in the right, you will find the final materials that we launch in Kinshasa. So we take in account all the feedback and all the recommendations of our target audience to just produce the final versions of our materials and also the messages. We also work with local influencers. This was very important for the campaign in Kinshasa. We are working with Madame Muvaro. She's a well-known Congolese chef, and she's showing to the new generation of women how to prepare recipes that used to be prepared with wild meat by using other type of meat like goat meat and also smoked fish. Something important that I want to highlight here is that each one of our materials is targeting a specific segment of our target audience. So in this way, we try to understand the values and the needs of each segment to avoid incomprehension on the message, but also feel that the people resound with our messages. For Madagascar, the materials you can see that are very different. So in the Kinshasa campaign, we have very urban brand, and here in Madagascar it's more about farming heroes, promote the diversification of livelihoods and more rural images. Here we have other type of materials, for example, these comic books that we developed for the young, and the cooking recipes book with a lot of images for the people that was not able to read the recipe. We have also campaign impact evaluation. That was one of the most important components of our work. So in Madagascar, we are currently working in a knowledge attitude practices study before and after the campaign. As I mentioned before, in Madagascar, we are currently producing the materials. So soon we will launch the baseline of the CAP study. In Kinshasa, we are working with interactive voice response mobile phone to do the survey and to have the baseline before the campaign. And we are working in the second phase of the campaign, so at the end of the second phase, we will have the final results of the impact evaluation for the Kinshasa campaign. Before to finish, and as I also mentioned before, something very important for us is that we are not working alone. We are working with the two national governments of Congo, Congo-Brazzaville and Congo-Kinshasa, and it was actually the National Minister of Environment that launched the campaign in Pointe-Noire and in Kinshasa, and it was actually the government, the national government, that invited people to reduce their wild meat consumption. We are also working with local organizations interested in behavior change, so we have a campaign coalition to join efforts and share knowledge and experience. Before to finish, I just want to share some points that we learned in this path of learning on behavior change. So first, as I mentioned, behavior change interventions need to be adapted to a specific context. The second is about how important is to understand how divergent could be the different perceptions between consumers and conservationists. So for example, for consumers, eating wild meat was not a problem. For conservationists, it could be a problem. The third one was about a good one. So it was because we had a very positive branding with our campaign that government was very happy to support the campaign. Otherwise, they are very reluctant to say people to stop to eat wild meat, and it's very risky for them. The fourth is about, to be practical, about the materials. So we work with professional communication agencies, local communication agencies in Pointe-Noire and in Kinshasa, and we are very happy with the materials that we produce, and it was because the quality of the materials that people was very happy to share with them. And for example, some radio stations continue to diffuse the radio spots because they took that it was a very good materials. Finally, because we have also the experience of engaging with influencers, with local influencers, in this case was very positive, but we also wanted to engage with much influencers, and we hope to do it in the phase 2. However, we need to acknowledge that this needs to be risk assessed, because contradictory behavior of the influencers could damage the campaign image and also the credibility. So thank you very much to stay, and thank you also for our donors that support our work.
Thank you very much. Who has questions for Liliana?
Easy ones.
Oh. Don't let her get away with easy ones, because she just asked for them.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting. I'm curious if you guys are thinking about like the long-term monitoring and evaluation plan, and like you know, how quickly you think that this would kind of trickle into supply, and how long the campaign will go.
Yes, good question. Well, I think that the first thing is to be clear that behavior change will take time. It's not in 1 year that we will reduce wild meat consumption in Kinshasa, because it's a huge city with a huge demand of wild meat, sorry. So this is the first thing. Definitely, I think that we need to continue to do research, for example, consumer surveys, and we need to continue to monitoring what is happening in terms of the presence in the markets, the prices, the consumption with the urban consumers, for example. But I also think that we need to continue to do this type of interventions if we want to do some difference in the next years. So if we continue with this type of interventions, I absolutely think that we need to continue to closely monitoring what is happening with this type of interventions. So I think that all along the diffusion of the interventions, all along this need monitoring. For example, for our campaign, we are, of course, using a strong research impact evaluation, but we are also using other type of information for feedback from, for example, the feedback from the local coalition that understand very well what is happening with the campaign, and also with the social media. So we are including in our reports all the interactions that people has with the posts of our campaigns, and also, for example, the inbox messages and the comments on the posts of the campaign.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'm sure I saw some more hands up over here. Some.
Hello. Hello. Sorry, I was just wondering actually whether there'll be any way to measure whether the effects of the implementation of these schemes will be due to the program itself, or whether it will be due to any other counterfactuals or any other covariates?
Yeah, I think that Diogo could help me with this one. So Diogo is helping us with the impact evaluation, and actually we are doing exactly this for the impact evaluation of the Kinshasa campaign.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to give a word on this. Yeah, so the way we're doing this is we're using a quasi-experimental approach. So we're looking at people who have been exposed and not been exposed to the campaign, and then we're trying to match them so that they're as close as possible, so we can then have a counterfactual and explore. Something else we're trying to do is because we know that there's many ways you can match two groups of people, trying to explore a wide variety of different estimators, so that we get a type of sensitivity analysis and see if, regardless of whether the result is dependent on the estimator that you use to match the different samples, right? And in this way, we hope to have a pretty robust sense of where we lie, right? And what is changing, what is not changing, and a little bit why, right? So we also measure exposure, so what proportion of the audience is exposed to the messaging, if they can recall it, those types of things.
Any last questions? No, she's too tired. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. That wraps up our symposium. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, a big round of applause to all of our presenters who did such a wonderful job of presenting. Thank you so much. We will be around here to chat further, so please come and chat with us and have a great evening.